Alright guys, number 25 from the homework. Let's solve this absolute value equation. And the first step on solving absolute value equations is to isolate the absolute value on one side. And I put left right here because it's easier to stay organized and keep it on your left. Anyways, let me move this to the side. So let's isolate that absolute value. What do I mean by isolate? I need to get this absolute value right here all by itself. I do not want this 2 right here. And this is really the multiplication of 2 that I don't want. So if I want to get rid of it, I need to do the opposite of multiplying by 2. So I'm going to divide by 2. It'll cancel out. I'm going to divide over here by 2. And unfortunately, 3 is not divisible by 2. So I'm going to actually have that disgusting fraction right there. Anyhow, that was step 1. Step 2 is to set up the positive and negative situations. And you guys know how I do it on the board. I write pos, neg, squiggly line in between. How do you set up the positive situation? You write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values, right? How about the negative situation? Same thing, but you have to change all the signs of the right side. Or you could also think of it as multiplying by -1, okay? What's up, Albert? How you doing? Okay, out of the way. So we want to set up a positive and negative situation. Pos, neg. So for the positive situation, we're going to rewrite it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. Now keep in mind we already got rid of the 2 right here, and right here we actually have a fraction. So I'm just going to rewrite the 4 minus n equals -3/2 n. And for the negative situation, just like the instructions say on the board, write it exactly the way it is, but change the sign of the right-hand side of the equal sign. So I need to change this negative to a positive. I know that's kind of weird because for the positive situation, you have a negative here. But remember, the instructions say the positive situation, write it exactly the way it is. Exactly the way it is, just take off the sticks. The negative situation, you have to change the sign of the right-hand side. So let me do that. Notice that I did not include the negative, because remember, for the negative situation, you change that sign, so it's now +3/2 n. So let's continue and solve both, because step 3 is to solve both and check your answers if necessary, and in this case, we do have to check our answers. Let's solve both right now. Let's get n by itself on one side. We have an n right here and an n right here. Now the problem is, I have a fraction that might throw a lot of us off. So we could simply get rid of this divided by 2. We could get rid of the fraction, make it a regular 3n. We could get rid of the divided by 2 by doing the opposite of dividing by 2, which is multiplying by 2. So I'm going to multiply everything by 2. I'm going to multiply this 4 times 2, this n times 2, and this fraction times 2. And that will cancel out the 2's. And let me rewrite what I would have left. I would have an 8 minus 2n equals -3n. And now I want to get n by itself on one side. I have n's on both sides. So let's get n by itself on one side. I'm going to get rid of the -2n by going +2n. That will cancel out. What I do to one side, I do to the other, +2n. And I want to have a new equation that says 8 equals -1n. So I have one more step to do. That would be getting rid of that -1 by dividing by -1. And I have a final answer of -8 equals n. But I prefer to write it n equals -8. Okay, so we have one answer. Let's go to the negative situation. And let's solve that one. Same thing. We want to get rid of that fraction to make it a little easier on us. We're going to multiply everything by 2. This times 2, this times 2, and the fraction times 2. The fraction cancels out. I have a 3n equals, I have a 2n right here with a minus sign in front, and I have an 8 right here. Once again, we have n's on both sides. I need to get n by itself on one side. I am going to get rid of the -2n by going +2n and +2n. And I do end up with 8 equals 5n. And I still need to get rid of the 5 by dividing by 5 and dividing by 5. So I do have an answer, n equals 8/5, and I prefer to write it this way, n equals 8/5. Okay, that's an ugly 5. Anyway, we're done. We have our answers. However, if we take a look at our notes, this step 3 that we just did, we solved both equations, but we must check our answers if we have a variable on the outside of the absolute value on the original equation. So, fact is, on the original equation, I really did have a variable on the outside of the absolute value. Yeah, there's a variable inside, but there's a variable outside of the absolute value. And whenever there's a variable outside of the absolute value, we must check these answers. Why? Because maybe one works, maybe both work, maybe neither of them work. Then you would say no solution. But we have to check them. So here's the challenging part, checking it. What we have to do to check it is to plug in the numbers. So what I'm going to do right here on the side is rewrite this entire equation, but I'm going to plug in -8 into the ends, okay? The original equation, that is. This is getting ugly, but I did plug in the -8. I plugged it in with in red so you guys could see it clear. So I took that -8, put it right there in that end spot and that end spot. Anyway, let's actually work this out to see if it actually works or not. So on the inside of the absolute value, the minus changes to plus, and I will have 2 absolute value of 4 plus 8, which is 12, okay, equals, and I might as well do this right side over here, -3 times -8, that's positive 24. Okay, and what is the absolute value of 12? That is 12, so I really have 2 times 12, and we know that 2 times 12 really is 24. So we've checked it. We know that this one for sure is an answer. So maybe the other one's an answer also. Let's double check it. Now the other one is going to be a little bit more challenging because we have to plug in a fraction 8/5. Once again, I want to rewrite this one. This time I just rewrote it with blank spots right here. Now I'm going to plug in the 8/5 in both spots. So a lot of people get freaked out because on the inside of the absolute value you need to actually subtract. And the easiest way to do that is to put a 1 underneath the 4 and think of a common denominator, the 1 and the 5. Well, you're going to have a common denominator of 5. The 5 is already a 5, so you could just leave it 5, leave it 8, and put the minus sign right there. But this 1 right here, I'm going to change that to a 5. And how would I do that? By multiplying by 5 and multiplying by 5. So I would end up with 20 up on top. Okay, so I really have inside the absolute value, I have 20 over 5, which is 4, minus 8 over 5. Now the 2 is still on the outside of the absolute value. So now I'm able to actually subtract 20, take away 8, and that would be 12. So I have 2 absolute value of 12 over 5 equals, now on the other side it's really easy to do because multiplying fractions is even easier than adding or subtracting. So you could put the 3 over a 1 if you want, but you're simply going to multiply the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. -3 times 8 is -24, and on the bottom 1 times 5 is 5. Now when I think of the absolute value of 12/5, that simply is 12/5. Okay, and the equal signs are going to come down, and the -24 over 5 might as well come down. And the 2, I need to bring it down and multiply it with that 12/5 that I have, positive 12/5. Now, we already know for a fact that 2 times a positive 12/5, even if you were to, go ahead and do it if you want, put it over 1 and multiply, and you end up with 2 times 12, that is 24, but it's not -24. Fact is, you have a positive times a positive. It's impossible for your answer to be a negative, so you know that it doesn't work. Now, what does that mean? That this answer right here, that's what we call an extraneous solution. It's an extra answer that does not work, so we cannot include it in our final answer, okay? So in this case, number 25, this was a very challenging question because after doing all the work and getting 2 answers, you realize there's a variable on the outside, so you have to go back and you have to test both answers. As you saw, we tested one, it worked. We tested the other, it didn't work. So the only answer that you're going to give on the test is this.